Alright, what's up guys? My name is Zack, and today I am driving a 1979 Ford Thunderbird. Up front is a 5.0 liter V8, and down below is a 3-speed automatic transmission. Now, I am super excited to be driving this Thunderbird for two reasons. First of all, I love this era. This is the era of the great American downsizing, and we'll talk about that a lot towards the end of the video. But the second reason is the fact that this car is such a cream puff. It is so well kept, such a wonderful, wonderful example with only 33,000 miles on it. So we're gonna get a really good, really solid in-depth look at what this car looked like back in the 1970s. But if you would like to submit your own vehicle and have it reviewed here on the channel, you can head on over to my website, zackpradel.com/submit. It's a quick and easy submission form. It takes under a minute to fill out, and I come out to you. And if you'd like to see all my videos weeks or sometimes months in advance, you can head on over to my Patreon for only $5 a month. But let's get back to that 5.0 liter, really truly a 4.9 liter V8, better known as the 302 V8. Well, this is the Windsor engine. It goes by many names, and it's 302 cubic inches. I always convert to liters for my videos so you can compare it to what a modern car would be like. The modern Ford 2.3 liter is less than half the size of this engine. But it was known as the 302, and that's what we'll talk about later on. The Windsor motor was in production for a very long time, and it was put in a lot of different vehicles. Now, this car has had its head gasket replaced, although that's it. That's been the only issue and the only fix that it's needed. Everything else is original. And they put the 302 in the Mustang, in the Bronco, and lots of other Ford products. So it's a pretty well-known engine. If you tell any Ford guy you have a Windsor, they're gonna understand, named after the plant it was built in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Like I said, paired to it is a 3-speed automatic, very, very common for this era. Big cars like this tended to have as low of gears as 3-speed, but only a decade before they were still operating with 2-speed automatics. So the 3-speed was kind of an upgrade. It's the C6 transmission. It works well, no complaints. Last but not least, the Ford Thunderbird is still rear-wheel drive in this era. So how does it feel to drive the 79 Thunderbird? Well, it's a big car. Although not the biggest, and we'll talk about later on, it has incredibly cushy and bouncy suspension. You hit a bump at front, wait a business day, and then you hit the bump at the back. I drove down a gravel pitted road, and it felt like the car was more so crawling than actually driving. You sort of felt the suspension go up and down and left and right like a rocking ship, but it was comfortable. And that was the big sell of these cars. This is as long as a modern pickup truck, yet you only have 2 doors. This was personal luxury, and you get that. Visibility is wonderful because I have really thin A-pillars, and everyone stops and stares, especially with how clean this car is and the beautiful bronze color. It really is a showstopper. With that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I have a bunch of gauges. Off to the left is my fuel, alternator, and high beam. Then I have my speedometer, temperature, and some more warning lights, and a clock to the far right. On the steering wheel, I do get cruise control options, which is very nice to see, but also this little Thunderbird badge, which I absolutely adore. Love, love, love seeing that. Off to the left, we do have a climate control vent, and down below we have the climate controls. This is of the era where the climate controls were really off to the left and hidden from any sort of passenger. We also have our light switch over there, and off to the right we have our washers and wipers and the Ford stereo. So everything is contained directly in front of the driver. On the door, we do have power mirrors and power windows. Very, very nice features to have here in 1979. And moving into the center, as I mentioned, nothing for the passenger. You get 3 climate vents, a Thunderbird badge, and that is it. Now, inside the glove box, you do have a trunk release, which is very, very cool to see. No center console, no cup holders, so it fails the big friggin' bottle test. And then we have these giant seats. Now, they look like they would be a bench seat. You would think that they were touching, but they actually aren't. They're just big seats. and they are incredibly comfortable. Now, of course, that goes with the territory of the 1970s, but I'm so happy to see them here. I also just love this interior color. It is brown on the outside, brown on the inside, which is just so 70s. I love this. This is a walking billboard of the 70s. However, this is a big coupe, so we do have back seats. So let's go do a backseat review. All right, we're in the back of the Ford Thunderbird from 1979, and although I do fit back here relatively well, and I could ride back here on a road trip, I wouldn't be too pressed about it. You really start to notice going from early 70s where I could swim laps in the back of a coupe to now, I kind of gotta be, strategic about my placement back here. It is starting to affect it. Now, something they did not get rid of is the ashtray on the back of the driver's seat. There were some compromises that were not going to be made in the 70s, and that is one of them. I have this wood panel over here that does seemingly nothing, but I get to enjoy the two windows, and the seats themselves are still cushy and comfortable. So again, as we'll talk about later on, this is kind of the beginning of the end. You could see that shrinkage starting to happen in real life, in real time with the back seat. Now, we'll talk a lot more about that in a second, but let's hop into the very back. We'll take a quick look at the trunk and cargo space, and then we'll talk about the looks. Right on the back of the Ford Thunderbird from 1979, we do have two keys. So in this era, you were given a key for the trunk and then a key for the ignition and doors. Circle key is for the trunk, and you can pull this up. Now, something the owner did want to point out, this just started happening, this sort of ripple. This is a very, very common issue for these cars, and it just started happening. It hadn't happened until recently, so the owner is pretty upset about that. But if you are looking at getting your own Thunderbird, or if you've owned a Thunderbird or currently own one, that is very common. Once we are back here, tons of space. This is still an American car at the end of the day. We have the jack usage and stowage instructions up there, but it's gonna have a big trunk. There, of course, is your spare tire. And then we have this liner that's just cardboard. So not a very expensive or high-end trunk, but tons and tons of space. And this was very, very common in this era. This was probably considered a mid-sized trunk compared to some of the other competitors, but by today's standards, I mean, you could put this on Airbnb and probably make a decent chunk of change. So very cool to see that in the back of the Ford Thunderbird. Now we gotta talk about the looks. And of course, like I said, brown on the exterior as well. I love this shade of nice bronze. So 70s. I like the Landau top or the fabric top. And honestly, I had one of those movie moments when the owner pulled it out of the garage because it was in the shaded garage and the sunlight hit the fender. I swear to you, I heard in the background. I mean, just look at this. It is such a pretty, pretty color. And it's so well kept. You have these really cool, designs down the side. The trim has this really interesting pattern to it that I've also seen on the Ford Maverick from the early 70s. I love it. It's really, really something special. And like I said, this is such a well-kept example that this really, truly belongs in a showroom, but I'm happy to see that Mike still drives it. With all of that being said, let's get on to my final thoughts. What do I think driving the 79 Ford Thunderbird? Okay, right off the bat, it's amazing. It's great. It's fun. It's comfortable. You have that big, lazy V8. You have all these really cool amenities. This is just a throwback to mustaches and sideburns of yesteryear, and I love that. But let's talk about the importance of the Ford Thunderbird. Well, we have to go a little bit further back in time to 1973. In 1973, the world experienced the oil crisis. Long story short, oil prices went up, and it scared the heck out of Detroit. So they started downsizing things. The government started putting regulations on vehicles. They lowered the national speed limit to 55 miles an hour for safety and for efficiency. Gas prices went up, and now big cars like this were suffering because it cost more to keep them on the road. People wanted fuel efficiency for the first time in the automotive history. And so cars started to downsize from that. The big, overpowering Continentals of the early 70s were kind of starting to lose fashion a little bit. And so this Thunderbird, which debuted in 1977, was the first generation of Thunderbird to be smaller than its predecessor. And this was over a foot smaller than the outgoing Thunderbird. However, it went from sharing a platform with the Continental in the previous generation to this one now shared a platform with the Mercury Cougar and Ford LTD. However, this actually sold really well. In 1977, they sold 318,000. In 1978, they sold 352,000. And 1979 was their worst selling year at 295,000 Thunderbirds. Now, to put that into perspective, last year, 2024, Toyota sold 310,000 Toyota Camrys. This car in 1978 and 1977 was more popular than the Toyota Camry is today. Those are some staggering numbers and really speaks to how popular this car was. But it was coming to an end. This era, this big, obnoxious era, was starting to end. They got rid of the 500 engine and they still had the 460, which was great. But then they started offering this, the 5-liter, or 4.9, or 302. And they said, yeah, we still have V8s. But by the end of the 80s, V8s were getting harder and harder to find in Ford products and American cars at large. So this is the tipping of the scales. This car right here, you might not visually see the difference between an early 70s and late 70s Thunderbird, but under the skin, shrinkage was happening. Shrinkage was real. And that's why this car is so important to the story of Ford. This was the beginning of the end. This was the start of the descent. But man, what a beautiful, beautiful example of that downturn. What an exquisite vehicle to be driving here today, and I am so incredibly thankful for that. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to Mike for letting me borrow his Ford Thunderbird for today's video. What an absolute stunning vehicle. I'm so appreciative of him taking the time for me to review it here today. Great, great, great stuff. And I thank Mike for that. But I thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.